What was the incident at your school? Story 1. I went to Catholic school, and so we had a school chaplain who was essentially some sort of friend to the kids. It sounds really creepy when you say it like that, but the dude was fucking amazing. He talked multiple students out of suicide, helped tons of kids come to terms with and overcome bullying, harassment, and domestic abuse, as well as encouraging every single student to reach for their dreams. Anyway, he once went the extra mile for a very troubled family at my school. The two kids in question were adopted brothers and both incredibly unstable. The brothers would be your best friend 1 second, and they suddenly fly off the handle the next, making you literally fear for your life. Anyway, knowing their family problems, the school chaplain volunteered to become the two boys' godfather in order to legally be able to help them and their family out financially. About a year after I finished school, the school chaplain appeared in the local newspapers. He had been arrested and imprisoned for raping the older of the two lads. For most people that was enough to condemn him, but most of the people I went to school with found the whole thing to be somewhat suspicious. Whenever someone encountered one of the two boys, they would instantly launch into a step-by-step recount of what exactly happened, as if desperate to convince everyone they knew that they were telling the truth. The only thing wrong was that these step-by-step recounts were usually vastly different each time they were told, as if poorly thought out. Regardless, the chaplain imprisoned and eventually died of cancer while still inside. It was only after his death that it finally came out that the rape never happened. The chaplain had run into financial trouble himself and so was unable to keep giving the boy's family money. As punishment, the whole family invented the rape story to teach him a lesson. The guy was a fucking hero. He even helped my girlfriend at the time get through her parents' divorce in one piece, and yet his lot in life wound up with him sad, forgotten, and alone. Story 2. This was an ongoing thing. I guess you could call a series of incidents, but shit hit the fan the year after I graduated. One of the teachers was found to have been having an ongoing relationship with an 18-year-old student. Not really that crazy, I mean it is, but you hear about stuff like that all the time. The crazy part is what they uncovered while investigating teacher number 1. Another teacher, teacher number 2, was found to also have been having sex with students. Multiple students, 16 of them to be exact, spanning over the course of his entire career. Apparently he would pick a new girl every year or so, groom her, and have a relationship with her until she graduated and he moved on to someone else. He had one of them living in his basement and they would go on vacations together. Once the news about him came out, everyone went wild. They also found a third teacher, teacher number 3, while investigating number 2. Teacher number 3 was a substitute that would buy underage girls alcohol in exchange for oral sex. All 3 were subsequently arrested and serving sentences in jail. A grand jury investigation found that the school board members, including the superintendent and the principal at the high school, all knew about teacher number 2's ongoing behavior, as there was numerous reports about it through the years. But there was a culture of we gotta protect each other and the school's reputation, and nothing was done about it. The superintendent of the school board resigned, but now for some reason has been put back onto the school board, and the cycle will continue. Story 3. Ah yes, the infamous mashed potato bowl incident. It was my sophomore year of high school lunchtime. The lunch at my school was always pretty subpar, and every other week they would make a mashed potato bowl that had lines going out the door. Everyone's in line itching to get their hands on a bowl when this rambunctious teenager cuts the line and swipes a mashed potato bowl. Kid in front pushes Francis and says, "Why the fuck you cuttin', bitch?" So Francis naturally proceeds with, "Because I can." "What the fuck are you gonna do about it?" Then pushes Jimmy back. Pow, Jimmy punches Francis and the brawl begins. Each fighter gets about 5 punches in when the school police officer comes to break it up. But Francis isn't done. Francis one punch KOs this officer and continues to fight Jimmy. Now some of Jimmy's friends come over to try and pull them apart, but Francis' boys come over and fight them. So now we have a 4v4 in the cafeteria, and everyone's going crazy. More police officers come and try to handle the situation, but the kids stop fighting each other and start fighting the cops. What the kids didn't account for though was the fact that the cops brought tasers. The cops tased a kid or two and arrested everyone else, bloody noses and all. We ended up getting an extra 10 minutes of lunch, which was nice. Story 4. One of the big 6 feet plus tough students who had a bit of a reputation as a bully and troublemaker decided he was going to try and intimidate one of the art teachers under the mistaken impression that just because Mr. Scott was only 5'5" in his socks and about 55 kgs wringing wet that Mr. Scott would be a pushover. He didn't know that before Mr. Scott trained to be a teacher, Mr. Scott was in the army, and whilst he was in the army, Mr. Scott was the divisional weight champion for boxing in Australia. He tried to push Mr. Scott out of the way, and when that didn't work he tried to punch him. Mr. Scott punched him on the jaw and knocked him out. And before anyone says it was wrong, this was 1977. My school still had corporal punishment. Teachers could and did smack you round the head if you were being a dick. You certainly never ever laid a hand on a teacher. Talking back got you the cane or ruler. So that's why this was the biggest incident at my school. Story 5. My friend told me this story from her last year of high school. A girl got together with a guy who recently broke up with his previous girlfriend, and the previous girlfriend wasn't happy about it. So naturally they got in a very public Twitter fight. And the previous girlfriend did the obvious thing and tweeted a picture of the guy eating her ass and said something along the lines of, "How does my ass taste?" The tweet got passed around a ton. Eventually, it got to the point where they arranged a time to fight outside the school, and when the time came there were cops waiting and nothing happened. I probably got several details wrong, but that's the gist of it. Story 6. A dildo was superglued to a bronze statue of our mascot. This wasn't just your average dildo. It was a massive black one you'd see in some crazy, ridiculous big dick porn. Now this third leg of a dildo hung from the statue right where it should have been, for a few periods before it started getting a lot of attention. The best scenario began to unfold as our much-hated principal left his office to take a gander at the hilarious prank. Infuriated, and a little on the hefty side, he was known to get red-faced and sweaty when he got angry. In rage, he grabs the black dildo, trying with all his might to jerk it off the statue, and some unsung hero snaps a picture of him in the act on his or her phone. The picture spreads like wildfire, and by the end of the day most of the school had a picture of our heaving, sweaty principal jerking off a dildo on a statue. That night an email was sent out to the parents of all the students to let them know there may be inappropriate pictures of the principal on the students' phones and serious consequences would happen if they weren't deleted immediately. But the damage was already done. Story 7. Junior year. A sophomore boy put a sealed container of chicken noodle soup in an empty locker next to the chemistry room. It sat there for months, easily 5 or 6, until somebody thought about it again. It was brought up in chemistry class and our chemistry teacher took a pair of tongs to the locker and planned to dispose of it once and for all. His hands were too shaky that day, and as soon as he lifted it out of the locker it fell, spilling the entire cesspool that the chicken noodle soup became. He immediately ran back to his room, screaming, "Oh God, shut the doors, and hilarity ensued. The smell was indescribable. Raw sewage, rotten chicken, fermented noodles all mixed into one. I have never and probably will never smell anything remotely close to it again. The smell permeated the entire floor and even seeped down a stairwell next to the spill to the classrooms immediately below. The day of the disaster everyone gagged as they traveled through the halls. Luckily it happened during 8th period, last period before we went home. A hazmat team was called to take care of the spill, just in case there were airborne diseases. For the rest of the school year, the teachers lit candles in the hallways and in their classrooms, but the smell never left us. It stayed all summer and even into the next school year until it finally went away altogether. The chemistry teacher who dropped the soup is actually now my stepfather, and we recount this story at least once a year and laugh our asses off. It is one of my best memories of high school. Story 8. One of my friends brought a gun to school because he was having problems with some kid. The other kid was in a gang and he feared that he would be jumped or worse, so he decided to carry it in his jacket pocket at school. So, he's sitting in the first class of the day, starts messing with it and it goes off. Everyone reacts to the noise, but apparently no one figures out what it was. It was a small .22, which isn't super loud, but I'm still baffled till this day. The bell rings and everyone continues on to their next class. Later that day a girl shows up to the nurse complaining of a burning pain in her lower back. Turns out she was shot when the gun went off. The cops are called and everyone is called back to the classroom. They figure out that it was my friend who had the gun. He was arrested and ended up in juvie. About a year later I'm leaving school and I bump into him. I say hi and ask how he's doing. He says he's doing better and then asks if I want to buy any weed. I tell him I'm good and keep walking. This was over 10 years ago and I haven't heard about him since. I hope he turned things around. Story 9. So this happened at my school in about 1972. I know this story because my uncle was the main perpetrator. So picture a private boarding school in England. The night before the last day of his final year, my uncle and his mates sneaked out of the boarding house. They went to the music department and nicked several of the largest amps and speakers and a record player. They climbed onto the roof of the 6th form building with all of this equipment and at the stroke of midnight, blasted out Alice Cooper's "School's Out" as loud as possible. This of course woke everyone in the school and local residents in about a mile radius. But wait, there's more. As they started the record, they were already climbing down from the roof. With all attention on that distraction, they ran round to the front of the school where one of the housemaster's 1969 Mini Cooper was parked. They then picked it up, carried it into the porch, atrium bit of the school's main entrance, turned it sideways and put it down. That way, the only way it could be removed was to pick it up again, turn it back the right way round and carry it back down the steps. My uncle was then called into the headmaster's office on the morning of his final day at school, expelled from the school and forbidden from stepping foot on its premises for 10 years. The greatest irony, my uncle has just retired from a long and happy career as a teacher. Story 10. I feel like it was sophomore year, but perhaps it was freshman. Either way, a kid committed suicide sometime during the fall and he was one of those kids that everyone knew, but not many folks actually knew him, you know. He wasn't like a loner or something. He had friends and was active socially, but kind of stayed off the radar. I honestly didn't know who he was until I saw a picture of him. No one really knew what hell happened because bullying wasn't really a huge problem and for the most part, no one saw it coming. Naturally, it turned into a whole big thing with candle vigils and shit. We had a big memorial thing in the gym and people who only sort of knew him talked about him. We had talks and announcements about bullying and depression and mental health and all that. There was even a big thing in the paper about it. It was all very weird for the majority of us since, well, we didn't really know him and none of us were mature enough to process any kind of real cause-effect. About a week after his death, his mom makes a confession. His suicide wasn't intentional. It was an accident. He had died as a result of hanging himself while beating off. He had skipped school and it was only by chance that she had came home early and found him hung by his belt in his bedroom, naked. She had manipulated the scene to try and clean up and prevent it from becoming news. But after several days of all these memorializations and stuff, she knew she had to tell the truth. It was apparently a common enough event nationwide that there were even experts who chimed in. Cue a complete repeat of the week before, except instead of the announcements and classroom segments being about mental health and depression and bullying, they were about the dangers of autoerotic asphyxiation. It was almost surreal at this point because this kid that was the poster child of depression and ignoring cries for help was now the poster child for jerking off to death. I can tell you right now, I've never thought about strangling myself while masturbating since then ... or before then ... or ever. Please drop down your stories in the comments. I would love to make videos on them too. And also don't forget to like and subscribe.